Welcome to the next module of our Geo Expansion series, where we are going to discuss how to adapt pricing and establish a business model. There are a number of important factors here, from setting off with a clear strategy to adapting to market norms and your expected rate of expansion. JR is going to be talking to us through the key points here, as well as drawing on real-world examples. JR, over to you.
So when you're looking at geo expansion, you need to be very clear about what your expectations are, what your goals are, and what it is you'd actually like to accomplish. That can be a host of different things, and some of them can actually be combined. But generally, you've got an increase in revenue. You've got you may be just going in to establish a beachhead so that you can expand upon it later. You might be looking at an aggressive rollout, a slow rollout. You might be trying to just get brand awareness. You might, in some cases, be looking at a market that doesn't have a lot of competition. So you're going to go try to establish your position and keep competition out. But whatever that might be, there's lots of elements that you need to consider. One of those might be, especially around pricing, and your model is, are we going to come in and sell directly, upfront, asking full price, or do we have a product that allows us to what they call land and expand? That would mean you perhaps have various modules to your existing product. And there's one or two that people buy on a regular basis. And then you can expand them and move them into through cross-selling and upselling into other elements of your product. A lot of this is influenced on what you do today in your home market, of course. The other thing, as we've touched on in some of our other discussions, is around, are you going direct? Are you going to take a partner approach? Or are you going to do a combination of the two? You also need to consider, what is the window of opportunity? Lots of times you are coming into a market that is highly competitive and there is a small window, or you may be the first in the market, but competition is coming. So that's a big consideration when determining pricing and actually how much you put into that model. Sales cycles also, they vary widely. So it's good to understand, in this market, based on your best estimate, what are the sales cycles going to be? Are they going to be similar to your home market, or may they be a little bit longer? Another thing that might influence your business model and the pricing is the norms within a current market that you're going to be competing against. So there's always a lot of talk around the pricing model in a specific market. And as we've talked about earlier, there are a lot of similarities no matter which market you go into. So don't get too wrapped up in that. Try to keep your pricing as consistent as possible to what you're doing in the home market, especially if you've got some customers that are global or international. You're not going to want to have a pricing discussion with one and then a pricing discussion with another. Say it's Coca-Cola or say it's IBM. These are global companies. So you want to try to stay as consistent as possible. We talked a little bit already about the land and expand, and that can vary a little bit based on the market and what the norms are in the market. But I guess the main point I want to make in this section is that you don't want to compete on price. I see it a lot. I see it with startups who come in and say, hey, we're going to disrupt the market, and we've got a product that's similar to our competitors, but we're just going to jam the price down. Well, that's a really unproductive race to the bottom. And so you should think of your products as being priced similarly when you're coming out initially as a new company, and the same thing when you expand geographically. Try not to compete on price. Instead, compete on the benefits, meaning the customer benefits and those features that you provide the customer. Compete on how you do it better. And hopefully there are some elements within your product that differentiate you, substantially from your competition, so you can also compete on that. So when you're looking at the competitive landscape, whether that's globally or when you're looking at expanding into a new market, you need to ensure that the market understands the problem you're solving, and it's a well-known problem. You may have to educate in some markets. It's always a tough one when you're considering which market to go into. It's a little bit better if they already understand the problem, and perhaps there is one of your competitors already there. Not that they've got huge market share, but they have done some of that legwork. They have made the calls. They do have sales guys on the ground that are educating the market with respect to the problem, how big it is, and why they need this solution. And then again, fall back on those differentiators. But be sure that you understand where your product is similar, where it's different, and how you differentiate, and then sell to those strengths. Make sure that you've got proper processes in place. Make sure that you've got those differentiators and product positioning well defined, and your sales guys are well equipped with battle cards to understand how they sell against the first player or the second player in the market that got there just before you did. One of our portfolio companies demonstrates this fairly well. When they were coming into a new market, their general strategy was to sell a product suite of 4 different modules. And they found that they generally sold all 4, or maybe 3 out of the 4, and later could cross-sell, upsell. But when they were going into a new market, they found that one of their modules, which was kind of the core, was incredibly competitive and incredibly compelling. So they changed their model just a little bit. So they left the total product pricing the same, but they entered the market in order to get better penetration quicker by dropping the price for that single module. So they actually sold that module up front. And of course, the customer could buy the full Monty, but most of the time they were just coming in with that lead, and they were selling the first module, and then they were upselling and cross-selling into the second, third, and fourth modules. And that worked very, very well for them. So that is one example of where you can modify your pricing a little bit, or your go-to-market based on the current competition and your desire to get into the market quickly and grab penetration. Once you've defined your market strategy and you're clear, then rather than coming to a large market and try to devour the whole thing up front, think about it similarly to how you thought about your initial launch of your product. You need to launch it, you need to test your assumptions, and you need to then adapt. And so, for instance, if you're coming into a large country, say the UK, or maybe even the United States. Now, to cover the United States, in an aggressive manner, you're going to need 12 to 20 salespeople on the ground plus management. And depending on whether or not you're a consumer product or an enterprise product as well, it will influence your approach. So what I've done in the past is I've picked a region, or maybe even a top city. Maybe it's New York City and Boston, maybe the East Coast, or maybe it's, depending on where your customers are sitting. If you're in banking, you're going to look at the East Coast. If you're in tech, then you might look at the West Coast. But try to not bite the whole apple at the same, eat the whole apple at the same time. Apply those same principles. Park yourself in New York or Boston. Experiment, learn, right? And then adapt, and then expand. Very simple, but I have tried it, and I have seen companies try it. And I think, your expenditure and your budget increases exponentially if you try to go too fast and go too wide. So again, focus and learn, and then expand. And we do have another example, which I was always quite impressed with within our portfolio, where they started in the UK and they really just focused on London, and they own the London market today. They took 1.5 years to perfect the model, the go-to-market, the pricing, how to attract customers, how to keep customers, and then they naturally expanded out throughout the UK. So then they had the entire market. And from that, it actually almost took them 2 years to get the whole country to where they wanted it. But then they were able to simply kind of create playbooks and cookie cutter their model to every new country. So they then expanded to Spain, to France, to Portugal, to Germany, and then they expanded to the US using all the lessons they'd learned from their initial market by taking the time to really understand it. And of course, they had to tweak it, and the market entry analysis and the legals and the tax and all that was always part of that market. But the basic principles that they applied were the same, and they've been able to expand quite rapidly, quite impressively. Another influence on your pricing strategy might simply be the competition, what the purchaser, the client, the consumer is used to paying, how they're used to paying it. And so you will have to adapt if you're planning to come into this market. Now, this may influence your priorities when expanding geographically. You may choose to come into markets that fit your current model, fit your current go-to-market. So it's less distraction, less upheaval within the organization. And so, but in some cases, like for instance, if you're going from the UK to China or the US to China, where they often have a very different structure and a very different model, then it may require it, right? So a good example of that is myself personally, when we were expanding into China, we'd already established a good footprint in Europe and a very good footprint in America, but the pricing model was very different. So with our SMB product, we had to create a freemium version of that product for small businesses. And when I say small business, that's up to 50 seats usually, so that we could get in the door, because that's the way it was done in China. Now in consumer products, freemium is king. And we had already established freemium for ourselves on the consumer space at AVG, but on SMB, not so much. So we had to, we were migrating to a SaaS-based product, which makes it easier to go freemium. And as that migration came to fruition, when we went into China, we were also able to then offer the product for free. And in a whole nother series, we'll address freemium, both in consumer and on the enterprise. But we had to understand what are the core product elements that are being given away for free in China that customers expect, and there's no way you're going to convince them otherwise. And then you differentiate and you cross-sell, upsell based on add-ons, different modules, other things that they will likely need. So your free product had a lot of value, but the other products that you added to it had an increased value and often addressed different concerns and different pain points within the business.